Have you ever noticed that the life you want can feel so close in your mind, yet so distant in your body? That is where many people become exhausted, not because they do not know what they want, but because they keep reaching for a new reality while breathing from an old one. They try to manifest with hopeful words, disciplined routines, and beautiful intentions, yet beneath all of that effort, there is still tension in the chest, urgency in the thoughts, and a silent fear that nothing will really change. Over time, that inner contradiction becomes its own prison. The mind says expansion, but the nervous system says danger. The heart asks for abundance, but the body remains loyal to survival. And when this happens long enough, frustration begins to look like fate, as if the universe were withholding something, when in truth, the deeper blockage may be the frequency created by unprocessed emotion, chronic stress, and a breath pattern that keeps rehearsing lack. This is why conscious breathing matters here in a way most people never fully understand. It is not just a calming exercise, and it is not a decorative spiritual ritual. It is the bridge between your inner chemistry and your outer direction, between the story you keep repeating and the state that finally allows a different future to take root. In this video, we are going to enter that bridge carefully. We are going to uncover why desire becomes blocked, how invisible emotional patterns distort your signal, and why a regulated breath can begin to rewrite the way you think, feel, choose, and receive. Because the moment your breath stops serving fear, your energy stops rehearsing limitation, and reality begins to respond to a different version of you. When desire rises from a body trained by fear, most people never realize that what blocks a desire is not always doubt in the obvious sense. It is not always a voice saying this will never happen, and it is not even always a lack of effort. Sometimes the blockage is far more intimate than that. It lives in the body before it becomes a thought. It appears in the shoulders that never fully soften, in the chest that never fully opens, in the breath that rarely travels all the way down without interruption. A person can say they are ready for love, prosperity, healing, or a new chapter, yet still carry the internal posture of someone preparing for disappointment. This is where so many silent contradictions begin. The conscious mind reaches toward expansion, while the deeper system remains committed to protection. And when protection becomes chronic, desire starts moving through a narrow passage, as if something sacred were trying to enter a house whose doors are technically unlocked, but emotionally barricaded. That contradiction explains why so many people feel frustrated with manifestation. They affirm, they visualize, they try to believe, yet nothing seems to stabilize for long. The reason is often more biological than mystical. The body memorizes emotional history with remarkable loyalty. If someone has lived through repeated disappointment, financial pressure, abandonment, humiliation, or prolonged uncertainty, the nervous system begins to anticipate more of the same. It learns to scan for what could go wrong long before the mind has time to form a hopeful conclusion. This does not mean the person is weak, broken, or spiritually blocked in some abstract way. It means their internal environment has been conditioned by repetition. The breath becomes shallow, attention becomes defensive, perception becomes selective, and without noticing it, they begin relating to the future as though it were just another version of the past wearing different clothes. When that happens, the energy behind desire becomes unstable, because longing is no longer rooted in trust, but in compensation, in urgency, in the quiet ache of trying to escape what has already been lived. This is why desire born from tension has such a different texture from desire born from coherence. One carries the vibration of grasping, the other carries the steadiness of alignment. From the outside, both may look similar because both say the same words and chase the same goals, but inwardly they are worlds apart. One says, "I want this because I am ready to participate in a larger life." The other says, "I need this because I cannot bear the emotional weight of where I am." That second movement is deeply human, and it deserves compassion, but it also creates distortion. It turns manifestation into a rescue mission. It makes the future responsible for relieving a state that has not yet been understood. And because the body senses this pressure, it stays guarded even while the mind tries to sound surrendered. This is the hidden dissonance so many people live inside. They think they are asking for a blessing, but their whole internal rhythm is bracing for another wound. There is also a subtle sadness in this pattern, because many people begin to blame themselves morally for something that is actually happening physiologically and emotionally. They call themselves inconsistent, negative, unworthy, or spiritually immature, when in reality they are often dealing with old internal alarms that have never been properly disarmed. A person can be sincere and still be conditioned. They can be intelligent and still be reactive. They can be deeply spiritual and still breathe as though life were one long emergency. This is why the conversation around frequency needs more depth and honesty. Frequency is not just a poetic word for feeling good. It is the living sum of repeated emotional states, embodied expectations, attention habits, and the internal chemistry of anticipation. If someone keeps rehearsing fear in the body, that rehearsal begins to influence what they notice, how they interpret events, and which possibilities they unconsciously reject before those possibilities even have a chance to arrive. And this is where everything begins to change, because once you understand that your body may be protecting you from the very future your soul desires, the struggle starts to make sense. The problem is no longer a lack of worth, and it is no longer a punishment from life. It becomes a matter of inner retraining, of learning how to stop approaching possibility from a state of contraction, like a radio trying to receive a clear signal while surrounded by static. The self cannot recognize what is aligned if it is constantly tuned to danger. The breath, then, becomes more than air. It becomes a doorway into a different internal order, a way of teaching the body that a new reality does not have to feel like a threat in order to be real. When breath becomes the language of inner alignment, there is a moment, often quiet and almost invisible, when a person begins to realize that their life is not only shaped by what they think, but by the state from which those thoughts emerge. Two people can hold the same goal, speak the same affirmations, even follow the same external strategies, yet the outcomes unfold differently because the inner atmosphere from which they operate carries a different tone. One mind reaches toward the future, while the body remains anchored in tension. Another mind moves from a place of steadiness, where desire is not entangled with fear. The difference between those two states is not merely philosophical, it is physiological, emotional, and energetic at the same time. And within that difference lies a subtle force that many traditions, both ancient and modern, have tried to describe: the breath as a bridge between consciousness and the body. Breathing is often overlooked because it is constant. It happens quietly in the background, asking for no attention. Yet within that quiet rhythm exists a profound influence over the nervous system, perception, and emotional tone. When a person lives under prolonged stress or unresolved emotional pressure, the breath changes without permission. It becomes shorter, quicker, and less fluid. The diaphragm moves less freely, and the chest carries more of the load. Over time, this pattern stops feeling unusual. It becomes the normal atmosphere in which thoughts are formed. From that atmosphere, the mind begins interpreting the world through a subtle lens of vigilance. Opportunities may appear uncertain. Silence may feel uncomfortable. Waiting may resemble loss. In this way, breath quietly organizes perception. Within spiritual discussions about manifestation or vibrational alignment, the concept of frequency often appears mysterious, as though it belongs entirely to the invisible realm. Yet frequency also has a very tangible dimension. It is expressed through the coherence between thought, emotion, and physiology. When those elements move in different directions, the internal signal becomes fragmented. A person may imagine abundance while the body continues to rehearse scarcity. They may speak of peace while the breath remains trapped high in the chest. The result is not hypocrisy, but dissonance, a kind of internal cross-current where energy pulls in opposing directions. The body, however, possesses a remarkable capacity for reorganization when given the right conditions. The breath plays a central role in that reorganization because it sits precisely at the intersection of voluntary and involuntary processes. Most functions of the body operate automatically, far beyond conscious control. Yet breathing is different. It continues on its own, but it also allows conscious participation. This unique position makes it a gateway through which awareness can influence deeper layers of the nervous system. When the rhythm of breathing becomes slower and more spacious, signals begin traveling through the vagus nerve, informing the brain that the environment is not hostile. Muscles soften. The heart rate finds steadier intervals. The mind gradually stops scanning the horizon for threats that may not exist. As this shift unfolds, something equally important begins to happen on a psychological level. The inner observer grows stronger. Instead of being instantly carried away by every emotion or expectation, a subtle space appears between stimulus and reaction. Within that space, a person can witness their own patterns with greater clarity. Thoughts that once felt absolute start revealing themselves as habits. Emotional waves that once dictated behavior start losing their urgency. This does not erase human vulnerability, but it transforms the relationship with it. The individual begins to sense that awareness itself has depth, and within that depth lies freedom from automatic repetition. In that quieter internal environment, desire changes its character. It no longer emerges from the frantic need to escape the present moment. Instead, it rises from a grounded recognition that life can expand without abandoning stability. The breath supports this transformation by teaching the body that presence is safe. Once the body trusts the present moment, the future stops appearing as a battlefield where everything must be fought for. It becomes a landscape that can be approached with steadiness rather than tension. The signal sent into the world begins to carry coherence, and coherence is the foundation upon which any new reality quietly begins to form. When the past quietly shapes the signal of the future, there is a delicate paradox inside the human experience that often goes unnoticed. Many people sincerely long for a new chapter in life, yet the emotional architecture within them was built during entirely different seasons. That architecture may have been shaped by uncertainty, repeated disappointment, sudden loss, or simply years of navigating environments where safety was never fully guaranteed. The body remembers those seasons in ways the mind does not always recognize. While thoughts can change rapidly, emotional conditioning moves with slower gravity. It settles into posture, breathing patterns, reactions, and expectations that quietly influence how reality is interpreted. When a person begins to desire something new, while still living inside the emotional imprint of what once hurt them, the future becomes filtered through the memory of survival. This is why certain desires carry a strange weight, even when they appear hopeful on the surface. A person may say they are ready for prosperity, love, recognition, or freedom, but somewhere beneath the clarity of that intention lives an unspoken question. What if this disappears the way other things did? The nervous system does not ask this question with words. It asks through tension, hesitation, and a subtle vigilance that appears whenever something meaningful approaches. Instead of meeting opportunity with openness, the body responds with caution, as though the arrival of something beautiful might also signal the possibility of another loss. This internal reflex is not weakness. It is the intelligence of protection, continuing its work long after the original danger has passed. Over time, this protective reflex can begin shaping perception itself. Events are interpreted through a lens that expects difficulty. Moments of uncertainty feel heavier than they might otherwise feel. Even positive developments can trigger unease because they represent unfamiliar territory. The mind may attempt to maintain optimism, but optimism alone rarely dissolves deeply ingrained emotional memory. As a result, many people experience a subtle internal conflict. One part of them wants expansion. Another part of them quietly remains loyal to the emotional landscape that once kept them safe. Within that conflict, energy becomes divided. This division often appears in the rhythm of daily life. Attention becomes scattered between hope and doubt, between enthusiasm and restraint. The breath mirrors this division by shifting between shallow bursts of air and moments of tight stillness, as though the body cannot decide whether to relax or remain alert. In such conditions, the internal signal that moves outward into the world carries mixed information. Desire says yes, but emotional memory whispers caution. The result is a field of energy that feels unstable, not because life is refusing to cooperate, but because the inner system has not yet unified around a single direction. The human organism, however, possesses a profound capacity for integration. Emotional memory is not fixed forever, even though it can feel that way when it has been rehearsed for years. Just as the body once learned patterns of contraction and defense, it can also learn patterns of coherence and receptivity. This process does not erase the past, nor does it pretend that old experiences never occurred. Instead, it gradually teaches the nervous system that the present moment is not identical to those earlier chapters. With enough repetition of calmer internal states, the body begins to release its automatic expectation that every meaningful step forward will be followed by collapse. Within this process, breathing becomes more than a biological function. It becomes a subtle form of communication between awareness and the deeper layers of the self. Each slower, more deliberate cycle of breath sends information through the nervous system that the environment is stable. Muscles respond by softening. Heart rhythms begin to organize into steadier patterns. The mind, no longer dominated by urgency, gains the space to perceive possibilities that once seemed distant or unrealistic. What once felt threatening begins to appear simply new. As this shift unfolds, desire gradually loses the heaviness it once carried. It becomes less about escaping the past and more about participating in the unfolding of life. The future no longer stands in opposition to the body's instinct for safety. Instead, it begins to feel like an extension of the same quiet stability that the breath is cultivating in the present moment. When that stability grows strong enough, the signal moving through thought, emotion, and physiology begins to harmonize. And within that harmony, the possibility of a different reality stops feeling like a fragile dream and starts feeling like a natural continuation of who the person is becoming. When inner coherence begins to reshape reality, at a certain point in a person's journey, a subtle realization begins to surface. Life does not always change the moment a desire is declared. It often begins changing when the internal state that carries that desire becomes stable enough to sustain it. Many people spend years trying to transform circumstances without noticing that their emotional atmosphere remains deeply tied to the patterns of the past. The body may still rehearse tension. The breath may still mirror urgency. The mind may still anticipate resistance. Under these conditions, the future can appear distant, not because it is impossible, but because the inner environment is not yet prepared to receive it without distortion. This is where the idea of inner coherence becomes quietly powerful. Coherence is not an exaggerated emotional high or a dramatic spiritual experience. It is a state in which thoughts, emotions, and physical signals begin moving in the same direction. When the mind imagines expansion while the body relaxes instead of resisting, a subtle alignment forms. The nervous system no longer interprets the future as a threat. Instead, it begins recognizing it as a continuation of the present state of balance. In this atmosphere, desire loses its frantic tone. It stops feeling like a desperate attempt to escape something and begins feeling like a natural movement toward growth. Breathing plays an essential role in this transformation because it gradually teaches the body that calm attention can coexist with meaningful ambition. When the rhythm of breath becomes slower and more intentional, the internal environment changes in ways that are both physiological and psychological. Signals travel through the nervous system, informing the brain that it does not need to remain in a constant state of readiness. As that message repeats itself day after day, muscles release layers of tension that may have been held for years. The heart finds a steadier rhythm. Attention becomes less scattered and more present. This shift does not eliminate challenges from life, but it alters how those challenges are experienced. What once triggered immediate anxiety may now be approached with clarity and patience. Within this calmer landscape, perception begins to widen. A mind no longer dominated by urgency becomes capable of recognizing possibilities that were previously overlooked. Conversations carry different tones. Decisions arise from thoughtful awareness rather than reflexive fear. Even time itself seems to move differently when internal pressure dissolves. Instead of feeling chased by circumstances, a person begins sensing that life unfolds in rhythms that can be participated in rather than resisted. The breath, steady and grounded, becomes a quiet companion throughout this unfolding. There is also a deeper emotional transformation that accompanies this process. As internal coherence grows stronger, the relationship with desire becomes more compassionate. Instead of judging oneself for past struggles or delays, the individual begins understanding that much of what once felt like failure was actually the nervous system protecting itself in the only ways it knew. That recognition softens the inner dialogue. Self-criticism gives way to patience, and patience creates space for genuine growth. In that space, the idea of frequency becomes less abstract and more experiential. Frequency can be felt as the overall tone of one's internal life. When tension and fear dominate, that tone carries contraction. When presence and trust gradually take root, the tone becomes open and receptive. Reality interacts with this tone in subtle ways. Opportunities are recognized sooner, connections feel more natural, creativity emerges with less resistance. These shifts may appear small at first, but they accumulate over time, forming the foundation for meaningful external change. As coherence deepens, the boundary between inner state and outer experience begins to soften. Life no longer feels like a series of events happening to someone who must constantly react. Instead, it begins to resemble a living dialogue between awareness and circumstance. The breath anchors this dialogue by reminding the body that the present moment is not an enemy. Within that quiet recognition, desire stops struggling against the past and starts flowing toward the future with a steadiness that feels both grounded and quietly powerful. The quiet moment, when everything begins to shift. At the beginning of this journey, the focus was on something many people rarely question: the invisible ways desire becomes blocked long before it ever reaches reality. Not because life refuses to respond, but because the inner signal carrying that desire is fragmented by tension, memory, and silent emotional defenses. When the body continues to breathe from a state of vigilance, the future can feel distant, even when the mind believes it is ready. But as you have seen, the path toward change is not always found in forcing outcomes or trying to control every circumstance. It begins much closer, within the subtle rhythms of awareness, breath, and internal coherence. As breathing becomes slower and more conscious, the nervous system gradually learns that expansion does not have to feel dangerous. The body softens its grip on the past. Thoughts stop racing ahead in search of certainty, and within that calmer internal space, something remarkable begins to unfold. Desire is no longer a desperate attempt to escape the present. It becomes a natural expression of who you are becoming. When the mind, the body, and the emotional field move in the same direction, the signal sent into the world changes. Life begins to meet that signal with new possibilities, not through force but through resonance. The transformation does not happen in a single dramatic moment. It unfolds quietly, breath by breath, decision by decision, awareness by awareness. Yet within that quiet unfolding lies the power to reshape not only how reality is experienced, but how it is created. Now consider this for a moment. If your breath has the power to shift your internal state, and your internal state shapes the reality you experience, what kind of future begins to form the moment you truly change the way you breathe? If this perspective opens something new for you, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next explorations of consciousness, energy, and inner transformation. And continue watching the video appearing on the final screen, because the next step in understanding how your inner state shapes your reality may be even more surprising than what you discovered today.